On today's Motorcycle Therapy, Elle and I sit down with Mark Richardson. Do you know who Mark Richardson is? Well, have you ever heard of this book?
That's not him.
Yeah, he didn't write that. But he did write Zen and Now, on the trail of Robert Pirsig. It's half biography, half motorcycle road trip.
The exact same road trip that Robert Pirsig took when he wrote his book.
It's a fantastic book. I think you'll like it. We also talk about the writing process.
We talk about motorcycles and road trips.
Of course, motorcycles and road trips. It's a good one. Stick around.
Just checking to see if you're listening.
I got one of these in case of emergency.
Oh, right.
It's an emergency.
That's in honor of our English guest.
Yeah,
Old
well, I appreciate
Speckled.
that because, in fact, it cost me 2 pints of Old Speckled Hen to get married. I had to buy off Wendy's dad at the pub with not only 1 pint, but a second pint. He wouldn't agree with just 1 pint. He made me get him a second one to like give me her hand in marriage. That was the dowry.
That's
And-
pretty cheap.
Right.
Well, I don't know. Old Speckled Hen's a premium beer. It's not like.
I think you got off pretty easy.
Well, cheers anyway. Nice to see you guys.
Cheers. Good to see you too. Last time we saw each other, we talked about this. We were in Uruguay, and you were interviewing us for Canada Moto Guide.
And the Motor Guide, yeah.
Yeah. Now, tell me a little bit about that journey. You were the editor-in-chief. You are, or you, or do you want to not talk about that at all?
It's okay. I was the editor of Canada Motor Guide.
Okay.
I took over as the editor after the founding editor of Canada Motor Guide, Rob Harris,
Right.
was tragically killed in 2016
Mhm.
in a motorcycle crash, in an accident. It was all very sad. And he had this successful website, which I had contributed to occasionally, but I was good friends with him. And I volunteered to look after it just sort of in the interim for a while his widow, Courtney, looked after things. So we kept it going. And then I just sort of became the editor of that.
Mhm.
Then it got sold to Auto Trader
Mm.
after about a year, or maybe it was close to 2 years, was sold to Auto Trader. And I stayed on as the editor. And then but as a freelance editor, right? When everything turned to crap a year ago with COVID, everybody got laid off. The website got sort of suspended. And I got laid off too. And I thought, when they called me back and asked me, do I want to contribute again to Canada Motor Guide? I said, you know what? I had a pretty good run. I had 3 years. I wrote an opinion piece every single week. I wrote 150 of them or so. And I'm starting to sort of wonder about what I should write about next, that kind of thing, right? So I thought, you know what? The break would do me good. So now I write an opinion piece every couple of weeks, and that's it. I don't assign any stories. I don't edit any stuff. I leave that to Dustin Woods, who is actually on staff at Auto Trader, who looks after the website.
You don't
And in
have
the
to
meantime,
deal
I
with,
just, it's
you
a
don't have
place
to
for
deal
me
with
to.
chasing up any freelance writers that are not great at hitting deadlines and things like that. All that headache is gone.
I don't have to worry about that at all. I've had years of that. And there's some writers who are even worse than you, Jeremy.
Is that
Believe
right?
it or not. Yeah.
Oh, I had a little pang of guilt, actually, and I think that was your intention when finally you said to me, you know what, I'm not chasing you for any more stories. You can contribute, and I will read them, and maybe I will run them, and maybe I won't. But, yeah.
Well, the great thing is that you managed to pretty much complete your South American journey
Yes.
with Canada Motor Guide, right?
That's right.
We followed you, as we had said we would. We followed you every month all the way down. And you wrote what you needed to write. It was great. And then you got stuck.
Yeah.
And then I followed you up by saying, this is why he's stuck, or whatever
Yeah.
it was. You had your say in that. And now we all move on to the next thing.
Yes, moving on to the next thing. And that's partly why I wanted to talk to you. You mentioned that you were writing an opinion piece every week. And I know that you have been a professional writer for your entire career, at least I think you have, in some capacity or another. And it always boggles my mind how much printable, usable copy you can produce. And when I look at my own writing journey, I guess, I struggle for every word. And I know that you must at times as well.
But it doesn't
somehow
always seem like it.
Yeah, somehow you make it seem quite effortless. Can you tell me a little bit about your process?
Like when COVID happened and you said that you were going to sit down and write your book. And I'm sure lots of people did that when COVID happened, right? Oh, well, this is an opportunity to sit down and do the thing that I've been putting off. But you actually did write a book. You wrote an entire book in what, the first 3 months of
I wrote
COVID?
2 books.
Wow.
Yeah, I did. Because otherwise, what else did I do? Watch Netflix?
A lot of us did that, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
all I've been doing is I've been making YouTube videos, and that is somewhat
Good
of a
ones,
creative outlet. Well, thank you. I think I'm getting a little bit better, but ultimately I can't help but think it's basically a stall tactic, because I feel like I would like to do some more writing, but this is keeping me busy in the interim. And a full-time job as well. So I'm not,
Those
independently
full-time
about-
jobs get in the way.
Don't
Yeah.
they?
And the thing is that I had always wanted to write a book, and I never was able to because I had a full-time job writing.
Mhm.
And if you recall, I used to be, I tell people I used to be a real journalist. I used to go into a newsroom. I used to do stories about stuff. I covered exciting stuff, death and wars and horrible things. I did all of that stuff. And then in the early 2000s, I graduated. I moved on. I became an editor. In fact, I was a writer, a reporter at the Ottawa Citizen, and a TV producer at Worldwide Television News, and all of this stuff. And then I got a job as an editor at the Toronto Star, which is what brought me back to Canada after a while of being away. And then I just liked to write. I liked to vent. I liked to, get something out there. So I pitched a motorcycle column at the automotive editor of the Toronto Star, because I was there, and I just said, hey, I'll give you a motorcycle column. I don't need any money or anything like that. I just like to write about motorcycles. Gives me an opportunity to write something every now and again. And he said, oh, no, we need a motorcycle writer. Haven't had one.
Perfect.
So I said, oh, I can do that. He said, well, why don't you give me some, I said, why don't I give you some pitches? I'll give you I'll come back tomorrow and I'll give you some ideas for stories that, if you're interested in them. He said, yeah, all right. So I went back the next day and I gave him 52 column ideas.
Wow.
And I said, this is what, and none of them were reviews of motorcycles. There's just stories about motorcycles. I said, I can give you one of these every single week for the next year. It'll cost you like $50 a story or something, not much, right? Because I was just doing it for fun. And I said, the only thing I ask for is that I'm in every single week, because I need to know, if I'm going to develop an audience, the audience needs to know that they can go to a certain place at a certain time and see the next piece, rather than wondering when it might happen, whatever.
Right.
So because I was so cheap and so easy, and it was right there, and I knew exactly, as an editor there, I knew exactly what it was that they wanted, style and everything. I didn't take a lot of changing of my copy. He said, yeah, sure, what have we got to lose? So I did, and then after a few years of doing that, where I was an editor at the Star, I then pitched for the job, and I got the job and became the editor of the automotive section. That's when I morphed into being a car guy. I had to pretend that I was interested in cars instead of motorcycles. And I'd been writing all this stuff about cars bad, motorcycles good for 4 years, 5 years, and suddenly I had to write about stupid cars.
Yeah.
So then I started doing that, but I carried on writing because I just like to have the opportunity to write and get my thoughts and opinions out there.
Well, that's another thing that I find fascinating about you, Mark, is not only are you prolific and you meet deadlines, but you also have the supreme confidence in your ability to do so. If I pitched an editor, I said, look, here's 52 ideas and I will give you one a week and they're going to be awesome, I would feel my larynx begin to swell shut.
Why?
And
Why?
I don't know, because I don't ever feel like I can repeat any success that I've had in the past. I think that's what it comes down to. And maybe you've just been doing it enough that you know that, I can string together some sentences, and maybe this one will be a stellar piece, and maybe this one will be just mediocre, but it'll be on time, and it'll be at the right length. I don't know.
Well, I don't get too hung up about it.
So when you first wrote I remember you talking about your first novel that you just finished writing, and you went, it's brilliant. I have never said that about my own writing, except for 1 or 2 articles, maybe.
I think there's one article that you're like, this is as good as it could be and I couldn't do better.
Yeah.
Yes. So I wrote my first novel, and it's brilliant. It's 95,000 letter perfect words of brilliance.
This is the first novel that you just wrote during COVID in about 2 months.
Yes, it took me about 2 months to write it
Mhm.
because I had suddenly most of my outlets dropped off. I would write for all these different outlets, the CAA magazine, the Automotive News Canada, various websites and the like. The only one that kept me on during COVID was the Globe and Mail.
Mm-hmm.
If you're only going to have one outlet, that's the one
That's
to
a good
have.
one to have.
Mhm.
And they were very good to me, and it was okay. But literally, my workload halved overnight, and you know what? That was okay. Actually, my workload halved overnight as soon as I stopped being the editor of Canada Motor Guide. That was
Mhm.
more work than I thought it was,
Mhm.
but it's true. So it dropped right off, and I had all this time on my hands. And also, I just started sort of to think about writing this novel. And when I think I was always saying it before, but I left to become a freelance writer in 2011. I left the Toronto Star as the editor of the Wheels section, and I thought, right, I'm 50 years old at this point. That was 2011. I thought, now's the time to move on. Actually, I was almost 50 years old. I thought, now's the time to move on. I had this idea that I wanted to go across Canada on the Trans-Canada Highway, right?
Mhm.
I wanted to write the story about the Trans-Canada Highway. And the Toronto Star wouldn't give me the time off to do it. So I thought, well, I have to quit then. So I did. And I quit, and I drove across Canada, and I wrote a blog for Maclean's magazine.
Mhm.
And I'm getting way ahead of myself with other things. Sorry, I've gone off on a tangent here.
That's
But
all right. That's what we're all about. We're all about tangents.
Yeah.
What I learned from this is that the previous year, in 2011, I had driven across Canada, well, from Toronto to Tofino with
Mhm.
my family, my 2 kids, 2 teenage boys, my wife, her sister, and one of her 2 sons. And the 3 boys were all about, within a year and a bit of each other, right? So I'd driven across Canada with them in an RV, which took me 4 weeks. And it was hell on earth. But I had sold it to the Toronto Star as, I'll write a blog for you every single day. Plus, I'll write you a story every single week. Plus, I'll give you a video every single week if you give me the time off to do this.
Mhm.
And I'll take 2 weeks as vacation and 2 weeks as work, or something, whatever it was. And
Mhm.
they said, yeah, all right. So I got an RV place to give me an RV, which counted for a lot. And I drove across the country, and I wrote the blog about it for the Toronto Star. And it was a lot of work.
Oh, yeah.
Every day is a
Mostly-
lot.
Well, I was writing like 4 or 5 blogs a day.
Mm.
And the trouble was that in a lot of the places in Canada at the time, I just couldn't get online.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I'm dialing up and I'm getting through at 16 kilobytes a minute or something. It
Mhm.
was terrible, right? It was very difficult. So I'd write like 5 blog entries and then send them all in every night. And got all the way to Tofino. And this ended up being a very widely read blog. I had 40,000 words of blog in the end. And I told the unadulterated, unadorned truth about what it's like to drive in an RV. It's hell.
It's
Mhm.
hell
It's
with your
packed.
family. That's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
I
My
have
kids
questions.
mutinied.
Put the fork in that. I've got a
Yeah.
question about writing about your partners
Me too.
in a
yeah.
moment. But carry on
Okay.
with your story. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. My kids mutinied the whole thing, right? It
Mhm.
was hell. And everybody that I met along the way said, driving in an RV is great if there's just the 2 of you.
Mhm.
But as soon as you got people stuck in the back,
Mhm.
we drove the Athabasca Highway. I was in the front seat
Mhm.
driving. My nephew was in the passenger seat asleep because
Mhm.
that's the only place he didn't get sick.
Mm.
And everybody else is in the back and they can't see the view.
No.
So properly out the window. So I'm not allowed to say anything about, gosh, look at these beautiful mountains, look at the glaciers,
Mm.
because it just makes them pissed off.
Mhm.
And my nephew, the only other guy who could see it, is asleep because his
unconscious.
stomach is hurting.
Mhm.
So anyway, the point is, I got to the end of it all. I handed back the RV, massively successful blog. It was the second most popular blog on the Toronto Star that month, after the Maple Leafs or after the Blue Jays or something. And then that was it.
Mhm.
It ended, and I didn't own the rights to it.
Right.
I didn't. So
it was all owned by the Toronto Star, and even if you wanted to do something extra with it, that was not allowed.
I couldn't do it. I didn't, because the Toronto Star was paying me for 2 weeks of my 4 weeks of doing this, and it was whatever. So it vaporized. I don't think you can find it. I have a printed copy, but it might yet see the light of day. But who knows? Anyway, when I then on that same trip, I discovered that the Trans-Canada Highway was about to be 50 years old. We stopped at a cairn. It was north of Sault Ste. Marie, just somewhere around Wawa. There's a little park, and there's a cairn that says this is the halfway point of the Trans-Canada Highway.
Yeah, in Manitoba.
Yeah. I'd never really thought about it.
That's the center of Canada, not the highway.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah, the center of Canada is farther west than you would think, especially if you're from Ontario.
It's just outside the actual longitudinal thing. It's because Beaver Creek and everything screws it up in the north, right?
Oh,
right.
The
There's
Yukon a lot of factors. It's all in dispute. We're gonna have a civil war about it eventually. We're gonna have to just move the mile markers. I know. Let's not joke
how
about
many
civil wars.
Areas
actually,
are up for debate between the states and Canada. Not to mention those Greenlanders. Anyway, I realized that the following year, because it said this is marks the point that of the Trans-Canada Highway, which was done at this year, and I realized the following year was going to be the 50th anniversary of the Trans-Canada Highway. And I thought to myself, well, that's interesting, because next year I'll be 52. And it would be great to drive the Trans-Canada Highway and the like. But I thought, I'm too late to write a book about it, because a book takes like a couple of years of writing and preparation and publishing. So what happened was that I'm driving across the highway, and I realized, oh, you know what? I haven't missed the boat at all, because there's this new thing called social media and the internet that's just starting to get out there now. Or it had been out for a while, right? 2011. And I realized that I should do this. So I pitched the Star on the idea of me driving across the country, and
you said again?
First of all,
you did that last year.
Yeah, but without the family this time.
Yeah, that's right.
So I get back and I look up to see what was the actual date of the Trans-Canada Highway being opened. And I see that the Trans-Canada Highway was opened unofficially, but open to traffic, and was first driven by the Premier of British Columbia on the 30th of July, 1962.
Perfect.
Which is the day that I was born.
Oh, wow.
I was born on the day the Trans-Canada Highway opened.
You were born to write this book.
There you go.
I'm exactly the same age as the Trans-Canada Highway. And I thought, so I got to do the book. So I pitched the Toronto Star, and they said, no, you're an editor now. You have to stay at home and sit behind a desk. Maybe we can get somebody to write a feature story. And I said, screw that. I quit my job and I arranged the whole thing, and I sold a blog to Maclean's Magazine. But what I did this time was I gave the blog for free to Maclean's Magazine.
Okay.
So that I could retain the rights. And I had all of the rights of ownership of it.
Smart.
And at the end of it, I had 50,000 words, or whatever it was, maybe it was 60,000 words, of a blog of 3 months of traveling across the country. I had all of the promotion from Maclean's Magazine, who had been publishing this thing for the 3 months, right, of me doing this. And at the end of it, I come along with my manuscript, and I said to my agent, here's a manuscript, sell it. So she did, and it was published the following year.
Yeah, show us the book.
You mean this book?
Yeah.
Canada's Road.
Road.
They say the book stops selling when the author does, right? Are you still making money off of your first book? Because I got to tell you, I met you years ago, I think maybe in 2007, 2008, I can't remember exactly. We were at the motorcycle super show, the Toronto International Motorcycle Super Show in Toronto. I don't know what it's called exactly, but something to that effect. And you were sitting next to my table, and I was pretty wet behind the ears, new author. I had Motorcycle Therapy out, and I saw you sitting there and your book, and I walked up to you and I shook your hand and I said, you are the author of my dad's favorite book. And you said, no. I think you're thinking of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And I went, no, that is the book, Zen and Now, on the trail of Robert Pirsig and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. That's my dad's favorite book. And he came to reading, he read in fits and spurts. And he was going through one of his spurts where he was reading voraciously. And this was his favorite. And he never even read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. He just liked the tale of you chasing down the author. And where was I going with that? Oh yeah, that book has done remarkably well, hasn't it?
My book or the original author's book?
Yours, the Zen and Now book.
Your book. Yeah.
We're talking about you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Though I think it's out of print now, and it's run its course. Nobody was quite sure if it might go back into print when the author died about a couple of years ago, but it didn't. It's sort of run its course. What I have to do now is become famous with another book. Right. And then what happens is people see you and say, "Oh, Mark Richardson, that's interesting. I wonder what else he's done." And they look it up, and then they go and buy your book, which they can do super easy these days through Amazon. Right?
Yeah. I've also read that book, and I've listened to the audiobook version of it, which is a much more masculine-sounding man than yourself reading it, by the way.
It's true. Buck Scherner, guy from Philadelphia. And I actually went on a book tour with this book, and I traveled on my motorcycle across America, stopping at bookshops, and this was paid for by the publisher. It's every author's dream. And I went all the way from here. It was the book was launched in Minneapolis, and at St. Paul, actually, in Minnesota. And then I went on my motorcycle and carried all the way down to Los Angeles, and then up the coast, and then back to New York and Boston and all that.
That just doesn't happen.
The thing is that I'd have to give readings from the book.
Right.
And first of all, the book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, is a quintessentially American book. And then suddenly, and in the book, it's not apparent that I am not American. I don't say who I am. I'm just the guy next door. So in the book, you just sort of assume that the author is American. And then it comes out in publicity that the author is some Canadian. And then I come along and do a reading and say, "Well, hello, I'm here to read from Zen and Now." And people think, "What the hell is this about?"
Who are you?
So it was a bit strange.
I mean, there were clues that you weren't American, right? You were riding Suzuki DR 650.
600.
Oh, that's right. That was even before the 650s were out, hey?
Oh, yeah. It was the original year of the DR 600. Yeah.
Nice. So there were little things peppered in there that one could assume maybe it wasn't an American author, but
most people wouldn't pick up on.
Fantastic book. Now, the Zen and Now, I'm going to keep saying that name so people get it into their heads. It's a great book. It's got a bit of a shocker, a bit of a surprise ending, right? Would you say it's got a bit of a gotcha moment in it? Elle's reading it now.
I haven't got to the end, so is this going to be a spoiler alert? Should I run away?
So Elle, I have to ask you, have you gotten past chapter 4 and 5 yet?
No, I'm just starting it.
Okay.
But there was a
because
thought
chapters
in your
4
mind.
and 5 is where people go, "Oh."
Okay.
And there was a point where you thought maybe the publishing of the book was going to be blocked, wasn't it? Wasn't there?
Oh yeah. The thing is that this particular book, Zen and Now, is a recreation, a retelling of the story. There's 3 things that we're trying to do here with Zen and Now. One is to explain Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And what I found was an awful lot of people, probably 90% of people, to my own mind, who bought Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance back in the 70s, back in the 80s, whenever. And it sold 5 million copies, and it was a total part of the national zeitgeist. Probably they didn't finish reading it.
At least not the first try. Like you mentioned, Dan, that was my experience as well. It took 3 tries.
It took me 2 times, to feel like I was beginning to understand it, rather.
And it took me 3 tries, a good 5 years apart from each try.
Right. Well, it took me 3 tries. It took me 3 tries about 20 years apart. Right. And finally I got through it and I thought, oh, and I have other friends who say, yeah, I read it no problem in a weekend. It was great. What's the problem? But the majority of people never actually read it, but they knew that it was probably a great book because it was being touted as a great book. So my book is supposed to be an explainer of what Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is all about.
Okay.
That's a tall
Which
task.
is ultimately, at its most rudimentary form, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is a story about a road trip of the author, Robert Pirsig, and his son across. His son was 11 years old at the time, from their home in St. Paul, Minnesota, to San Francisco, through the sort of north part of the States and then down.
Right.
And so I followed the exact same route.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out that I'm not alone in this. That's the route.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not alone in this. There are a bunch of people who call themselves Pirsig Pilgrims who do this.
Who
do it every year, or have been
Mm-hmm.
doing it every year. At the time that I did it, it wasn't really clear what the route was. It was still being figured out.
Mm-hmm.
GPS was very, very new, that sort of
Right.
thing, right? It was difficult. So I was in conversations and discussions and things with a bunch of people. Robert Pirsig said, I don't remember, and I can't be bothered. I don't want
And
to
he
talk to
didn't write
anybody.
names of towns every time he stopped. Sometimes he mentioned it, sometimes he didn't.
That's right.
Mhm.
That's right. Sometimes, you could sort of piece it together as to what it was.
Mhm.
You could do it roughly. But I was lucky that I had people to help me to suggest the actual route that I could follow in order to do the exact route that he did.
Mhm.
And also, there were still people who were alive who were able to help me with this. So I met, when he did it originally with his son, for the first half of the trip, they went with their friends,
Right.
Bob and Sylvie,
Mhm.
the Sutherlands, on their BMW. And I met Bob Sutherland
Wow.
and hung out with him in Minnesota, in Minneapolis. And we actually left from I went to his house, and then we went to the house that Robert Pirsig had lived in and where he had written the book and everything. And I met the people who lived there.
Did you just
And-
call him up and say, this is what I'm doing and I want to learn about his route and can you help me out?
Well, with Bob Sutherland, yes. I found him and
Mhm.
I wrote him a letter, and like physically writing a letter, right, and mailed it off.
Uh-huh.
It took me a year of preparation from the time that I decided I want to do this trip to the time that
Okay.
I did it. Because I finished reading the book lying in a hammock on my 41st birthday at a cottage that we were staying at on Rice Lake in Ontario. And I thought, that's a really good book. Now I finally got to the end of it and figured
Mhm.
it out.
Mhm.
And literally, I pushed through the book, not understanding everything, got to the end and turned back to the first page and read it again and understood
Mhm.
everything. Because now I had context. And I thought,
Yeah.
people have to have some context because
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Anyway, so I had a year of preparation for this. But the original house where he lived and stuff, we just went there and said hello, knocked on the door. How you doing? This is what I'm doing.
It's been a long
So-
time since I've read that book, so forgive me if I'm mistaken. But didn't you also find the drawer that he built and he talked about in the
Oh yeah.
book?
Yeah.
And it's still functioning
Yeah.
just as it's supposed to. So
So
here's
still on the casters from his son's roller skates.
So
Yeah,
here's
he
some
used
companion
the
books.
rollers.
This is the book we're talking about, Zen and the
Yes.
Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Companion book, Zen and Now. That's
Mhm.
written by one Mark Richardson. If you can't get through this book, give this one a try.
Yes.
And if you can't get through this book or this book, then you can get little excerpts of various writers in this book here, including one Mark Richardson
Mhm.
and Ian Brown
Mhm.
of the Globe and Mail, right?
Yes.
And
Mhm.
we were talking about licensing and the rights to your own work. There's another example of an author that I had to get the licensing rights for, and he said, you have to talk to the paper. I can't give you
Yeah.
permission.
Mhm.
Right, because he's on staff at the newspaper,
Mhm.
and so the newspaper owns what he does.
Yeah.
They pay him for it, right? They
Mhm.
pay him for going in every day or whatever it is and producing stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm a freelancer. I write for the Globe and Mail at the moment. I'm a freelancer, and my contract says that the Globe has first rights to my copy,
Mhm.
but I still own my copy after
Right.
that. If I worked at the National Post or I wrote for them, I would not own the rights to my copy. That's one of the things that a freelancer for the Post or Post Media gives up. I believe the Toronto Star is now the same deal, that you give up the rights to your own stuff.
How do you write about people that you know?
Oh yeah. How did you write the trip with your family included while still being delicate or respectful to your family without them wanting to hurt you after the book is published?
There's a chapter or two in Zen and Now where I think Wendy might cringe a little bit too, right?
Yeah. So when I traveled across the country with my family, I didn't hold anything back, and they're pretty used to me criticizing them, and they criticize me back if I need it and all that. And I just said, what they did, and I also gave them the opportunity. I think both of my sons at some point, or all three boys, wrote something in the blog at some point to give their side of it. When I did the Canada's Road story, the second half of the trip, this took me 3 months. I drove out in a Camaro. I went to St. John's, Newfoundland. I drove back. I got home over Canada Day, at the beginning of July. I spent a week at home, and then I did the second half with my youngest son, Tristan, who at the time was 12 years old, 13 years old. And he actually has a couple of blog entries that were published at Maclean's at the same time. And he criticizes me. He goes on, and it's lies, by the way, it's fake news. He goes on about me wandering. The first day that we were traveling, we found a place somewhere outside of North Bay called Cow Shit Valley Acres. And it was a huge sign beside the road, welcome to Cow Shit Valley Acres. And I thought, what on earth is that? So I went looking for the guy who runs Cow Shit Valley Acres, and my kid is in the car just cringing. He doesn't want any part of this. So he's talking about dad wandering around with his Tilly hat and his socks pulled all the way up, and it's not true. I didn't do that. But anyway, let him say it, because it's
tit for tat. And besides, you've got the bigger pulpit anyway, don't you?
Yeah.
You can always print some opinion piece about him.
I like the example that he set, though, giving the other person in the story a chance to share their point of view too.
Oh yeah. So do you want to write a chapter for every chapter that I write?
Not every chapter.
Oh, by the way, there's no guarantee that I'm going to write a book about this trip. I asked Mark for some advice, Mark, and you gave me the advice of make it fiction.
I suggested that you don't. The thing is to not try too hard. Yeah. Just see what comes out. Yeah. Just write. A friend of mine, Jay Stone at the Ottawa Citizen, once bumped into Leonard Cohen when he was a kid. Right? Leonard Cohen's like an aspiring poet or something. I don't know. And Jay would tell this story. He met him at a bus stop in Toronto, and he said, "Mr. Cohen, how do you write your poetry? How do you write it?" And Leonard Cohen said, "Just blacken your page, son. Blacken your page. Just write." And the first lot's shit, and it's probably crap. And I'll tell you, the first novel that I wrote in this time of COVID, that I wrote in 2 months, and it's brilliant. Nobody else seems to think it's brilliant. I sent it to my agent, and my agent told me in no uncertain terms why it is not brilliant.
Okay.
And she's entitled to her opinion. Of course it's brilliant. However, I understand that not everybody in the world has the same. So I can understand that maybe some people think that it's not brilliant. And so I thought, I then spent a month or so sulking because I thought it was brilliant. I thought that you were going to nominate me for a Pulitzer and everything else. So I sulked. I thought, well, how do I go about doing this then if I'm to make it even more brilliant? So I actually contracted with an editor to work with me, who read the book and gave me feedback, and this is what you do want to do, and this is what you don't want to do. And then I sat down and just wrote a new book with the same sort of trajectory, I guess, and the same names most of the time, but I got rid of all the stuff that people told me wasn't working. I used the stuff that people told me was working. I added to all of that. And I would be keen to wake up in the morning and come down to my desk, come down to my laptop and start writing. And part of the reason for that was because I wanted to know where it was I was going to go that day. I didn't know what was going to happen. I knew roughly how it was going to end up at the end. But when I originally wrote the first novel, I knew the first paragraph, I knew the last paragraph, I knew one thing that was going to happen in it. I didn't know anything else. And I just write and see what happens.
It sounds like you spend less time questioning the process and just letting the process unfold.
I don't question the process. I don't question it. I just sit down and do it. And, it's so great to have a laptop, which is also why everybody thinks they're a writer, because everybody can write and everybody can write. But you can go back and fix it. I'm not Emily Bronte. I don't have to go back and scratch things out and get it perfect first time. I can, So I would actually write. When I would write, I'd write every day. No, I would take Sundays off. But every day except Sundays, I would write, and I would usually write 3,000 words of 2,000 to 3,000 words of novel, and then I would rewrite probably 2,000 words of yesterday's writing. So I would come down, I'd rewrite what I'd done, and that would put me into the mood.
It's so simple, isn't it? So Christopher Hitchens famously said to his class one time, he was teaching a writing class at whatever university he was at, He said, if you can talk, you can write. But how many of us can really talk?
Yeah, it's true.
And you got to find
And
your
that's
voice.
where everybody needs an editor.
Yes. Well, in fact, speaking of editors, I wrote a book called Through Dust and Darkness. And Mark said, yeah, send me a manuscript. I'd like to take a look at it. And you graciously pieced through it, and you did a line edit. I didn't think you realized how much work would be required. You completely gave me all the right advice and line edit, line by line by line by line. And I looked at it and I went, nope, that's too hard. So then I sat it on the shelf for a bit. Finally, I hired an editor. I spent hundreds of dollars. Maybe I should have spent thousands of dollars. I don't know, but I spent a lot of money. And that editor basically said everything that you did. And they also did a line edit, except I was paying them. And so finally, I acknowledged that, yes, it needed a complete restructuring and rewriting. And then eventually, after leaving it for another 6 months, I got down to it. But for me, the writing process is painful. It requires
That's if you
practice.
agonize over every sentence.
Yeah, I suppose.
Don't agonize over every sentence. If you've got something to say, just say it. See where it goes to.
I'm agonizing over how Elle is going to perceive it. That's my agony right
I'm
now.
a little worried, honestly, too, but we won't know until we see it.
Well, I mean, Elle gets a little bit sensitive. I once called her motorcycle an aging motorcycle, and that upset her. So can you imagine if I'm trying to draw out the humor of a conflict that we had, and I'm trying to like be a little bit hyperbolic maybe, or it might not go so well. So I'm hoping to save our relationship. On the other hand, when I wrote Motorcycle Therapy, I kind of alienated my friend Trevor. And another friend of mine said, well, if you lose one friend for every book you write, that's still pretty good.
So just write it. And then after you've written it, go back over it and say, is this worth losing my friend over? Is this worth doing this? Because I can always redo it again. I can tone this down. I can tone it up. Do whichever. I mean, as you'll discover as you soldier on with Zen and Now, I was saying that part of the story of Zen and Now is a recreation, an explanation of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Part of it is a road trip, because I figured that people just wanted a good road trip, and that's why they bought Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance in the first place, and they didn't get that good road trip. It wasn't what they expected. So I wanted to give them a road trip, and this is what it's like. These are the people you meet, and I met a lot of the people along the way, and I followed it exactly. And I rode my old crappy motorcycle, which was threatening to break down at any time, just as Robert Pirsig had ridden an old motorcycle.
Right.
But also the third part of it is my own personal story.
Okay.
In which I'd been married for a while. The kids were a trial because they were young. They were making many demands on me. And the grass is always greener, frankly. And I wanted to just get out of there and go on a good road trip and just get away from all of this. So it was when I slept with the motel clerk, who was half my age, in South Dakota, that a lot of people have said, Mark, how did you explain that to your wife? And I said, well, I just wrote it. And then I let her read it, and then we discussed it.
Did this actually happen? Are you guys pulling a prank on me?
No, you're going to have to read the book. There is a chapter in there that would make a significant other uncomfortable.
Did she know about it before she read it, or was that her learning of it?
That was her learning of it.
Wow.
She didn't read the book. She didn't read the book. I wrote the chapter.
Yeah.
And then I said, here, read the chapter. Because when I got back from the trip, she said, well, how's the trip? I've been away for 2 months.
Yeah.
And she'd been away too. She went off with her kid, with our kids. She went off with the kids and had a holiday for a month or so.
Where's her book?
Yeah, I want to meet her and hear her side now.
And then and we got back, and she said, how was the trip? And I said, well, let me just write it. I've got all these notes that I've taken. I got lots of, because what I did was I took lots of photographs and recorded commentary to those photographs so that I could then look at the pictures later. So it's in the middle of February when I'm writing the story, and I could remember exactly and hear exactly and feel exactly how I felt at the time, so I could recreate it that way. And it worked very well to do so. But I just said to her, look, just let me write the story, and you can read it chapter by chapter.
Okay. And you're still
she
married.
said, okay. Still married.
Sorry, what did she say,
years.
Mark? Can you do that impression of her again?
Best not.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, I'm just starting. I haven't gotten into it very far at all. But one of the things that made me stop and put it down and think for a minute before I kept reading is early on, I think just page 7, you say, the ultimate truth about the world is biography. And I think you're quoting Pirsig when you say that.
Yeah,
but it
I didn't
sounds
say
like
that.
you're
That's what he
agreeing with
wrote.
him.
Yeah.
Would you say that you agree with that?
Yeah, it's telling the story of the world is what is created by people.
Mm-hmm.
Our world is the effects of people upon our world. We don't live in a vacuum. We live surrounded by people. Even today, even with COVID, we're surrounded by people all making decisions for us. Politicians, bureaucrats, the teachers at our kids' schools, the people, the grocery clerks, whatever. They're all an interaction with us. And even if it's an interaction like this, over Zoom, a virtual interaction, they all affect us. So when Pirsig said that the ultimate story is biography, that is what the world is. What he's saying is the world is created by people. The world that we experience is created by people, and you have to accept that and understand that. The irony is, Robert Pirsig never wanted his own biography out there. He was a very reclusive person. He did want some of it out there, but he wanted very much to be in control of it, and I don't blame him. So he didn't want to talk to me at all when I came up and said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be writing this story. I had contacted him. I managed to find him, and he was very reclusive about the whole thing. And in fact, there's the only thing that's not true in that book that I wrote is the name of his boat.
Okay.
Because his boat was actually, he ended up buying himself a boat with the proceeds of his of selling his book. His boat was actually called the Arete, and he didn't want anybody to know that because people would track him down by the name of his boat. They didn't want anything that would track him down. I knew where he lived. I figured it out. I was a journalist. I'd done this. I looked at his home on Google Earth, all of that stuff. But I was careful to not say anything other than he lives in New England. And if somebody else wants to track him down, they couldn't do so from my book. And I changed the name of his boat so that you couldn't go to the harbor and look for his boat from that. His boat is now since sold, actually. I was thinking about buying it, but I'm not that much of a Pirsig Pilgrim.
Well, I'm even more interested in reading further in this now. Maybe we'll talk again after that.
You got to read Zen and Now. I recommend both of them, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and of course, Zen and Now. I'm not going to say one's a follow-up to the other because you can read Zen and Now like my father did, completely on its own. And Canada's Road.
You can. And the thing is that if you try to read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance and it's not really your kind of book, that'll turn you off the whole thing and you'll figure that you're not interested in Zen and Now. But if you read my book, Zen and Now, it is a primer. It sort of explains a lot about what the author is trying to do.
Right.
And I think that you understand the final book a lot better, having read my explanation first. And then you want to read this.
I do want to read that.
This is the one that you are working on now, right?
It's the one that I handed to my editor a week ago. This is the rewritten book, and this is the one that's going to make me $1 million.
And what's
That's 90,000 words. It's called Bird on a Wire.
Okay.
Didn't they make that movie with
Michelle Pfeiffer and
Really?
not Michelle Pfeiffer?
wasn't it? I think it was. I'll bet you actually.
Aha!
Okay. Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Mark.
Pleasure's mine.
You're a dear friend, and thank you very much for the advice you've given me about writing and your input into my manuscript when you poured over it.
Well, I haven't really given you any advice here other than stick at it.
Yeah.
If you give up, because somebody told me, if you give up, you'll never be published because you'll have nothing to publish and that's it. The only people that can be published are people who saw it through to the end.
Yeah, a friend of mine once said the artist who suffers the longest wins. But
You don't have to suffer.
Yeah, well,
right.
So an alternative.
Just cut off my ear, do all kinds of self-destructive behavior, things like that.
Well, writing this novel, I was amazed at how satisfying it was for me. I really enjoyed doing it. And I've written a lot of stuff that I haven't really cared about. other people have cared about it, but it's reportage. It's things that aren't, that's exciting to everybody. And sometimes you have to slog it through a little bit.
Mhm.
If you're writing a review of a car and it's not the kind of car that you would be interested in, I do that sort of thing as well. Then, you got to push it through a bit. But then when you're writing something you want to write about, just write it. See what happens. And nobody has to look at it except you. If you don't like it at the end of it, it's fine. Throw it away if you need to. It doesn't matter.
Mark, you're a friend, you're a gentleman. I consider you a mentor, regardless of how involved you are with my work going forward. I look to your career and I look forward to reading more work by you.
Me too.
And I look forward to talking to you again,
Very good.
maybe one day in person.
Yay,
Yeah,
hopefully.
you never know. It might actually happen, right?
Yes.
You never know. And Elle, I hope you enjoy reading the rest of my book.
I look forward to it. I'll let you know how it goes.
Thank you.
That was Mark Richardson.
I like him.
I like that guy. I consider him a friend, a mentor. He has helped me out a lot in my writing process, and he's also been very threatening to me personally when I miss his deadlines.
Which has been helpful for you.
I have missed a lot of deadlines. I used to write kind of a monthly article for Canada Moto Guide when he was at the helm, and you saw my process. It was horrible.
You waited till the end of the month and then you panicked.
Yeah, I panicked, and then I went off by myself and I pouted and I got really angry because I wasn't being left alone and didn't have enough time. And then I tapped, and then I sent him some good articles, I would say. Some were, I don't know. The writing process for me is difficult than it is for Mark.
It sounds like it, but he also mentions pouting too, so I liked hearing about that. That was interesting to know. It seems like that's part of the creative process. You gotta put out what you've got in, and then there's gonna be some times when you need to look at the work and decide if it's good and get some other opinions, and there's a little bit of suffering involved, no matter how you look at it.
I mean, for me, it's always difficult to look back at what I have produced and say, yes, that's good. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. Mark seems to be a little bit better at making that disconnect.
Yeah, he seems a little bit better at being able to relax, where you seem to have pretty high standards.
Yeah, I mean, and Mark has high standards too, don't get me wrong, but I think he can forgive himself and move forward and realize that you can always change it. Just
He's better at letting go.
like Leonard Cohen said, just blacken the page. Just blacken the page.